That was a reaction from the opposition parties there, including the EFF as well as the DA. For more on this story now, we cross live to our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's in New York, who's been monitoring this story for us. So Sherwin, a very good evening to you. So this story is not going to end up in New York, where you are at the UN.
Well, there's always a feeling, Peter, around the world that if there's an issue anywhere in the world, it ends up at the United Nations, but not in this instance. The Security Council probably wasn't the best venue or chamber or organ of the United Nations to take any punitive action against South Africa, given, as I said in that piece earlier, that a number of members of the Security Council do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC, so it would have almost been a moot point in referring this case to the Security Council because it was the point of referral. This is why Sudan, who was not a state party to the Rome Statute, was able to be investigated by the ICC because of the United Nations referral. And I think this speaks to a broader point. What teeth does this International Criminal Court really have when its state parties, its members, break the rules, if you will? And I think this is a very clear indication that there isn't perhaps much that the International Criminal Court can do in terms of enforcing its rulings. And I think that opens a broader conversation about the role of South Africa's domestic courts. Because remember, the Rome Statute was domesticated in terms of South African law. So there's a case to be made now, I think, for certainly the opposition parties and activists of this court, that this matter now be heard by the Constitutional Court. You'll remember that last year this was suspended because South Africa was then starting a process of withdrawal from the court. That has since been rescinded. So it's a bit unclear about, in terms of legal forward-looking, where we go to from here.
I would imagine a number of African countries may feel a little emboldened now and may want to follow South Africa now fully in withdrawing from the ICC, given it looks as if the ICC is powerless, as we were saying.
I'm not sure you're correct on that point, Peter. I think there's a huge split and a disparity in Africa's views regarding their continuation within the Rome Statute. We saw a huge division by a meeting of states parties last year. South Africa and a few countries were very much in the minority in terms of withdrawing from this court. And I think in the last few months, you've heard from countries like Zambia, you've heard from countries like Uganda. There's a strong support for the court in West Africa, countries like Senegal and Nigeria. South Africa is not taking a leadership role in this instance anymore, given the huge disparity we're seeing amongst African countries regarding their future participation in this court. So it's not quite as clear-cut as you see. And in terms of the legal basis, I mean, remember there were a number of domestic court rulings against the South African government. Those court rulings have merely been affirmed now by the International Criminal Court. So it's not like there was this huge boulder rolling down a hill gathering moss. In terms of support for South Africa's decision, the legal basis, South Africa was always up against winning this case.
All right, so what happens now, Sherwin?
I think it goes back to, and I mean, I'm no legal expert, Peter, but I think it goes back to the South African process in terms of what was going on in South African courts. Remember, there was a High Court decision that compelled the South African government to arrest. The South African government then appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, which upheld the lower court's decision. There was then a process that was going to see this case go to the Constitutional Court, which was then suspended by the Minister of Justice, Masuta, given the fact that South Africa had then initiated proceedings to withdraw from the Rome Statute. So they felt there was no reason really to go through with the Constitutional Court case. It's unclear now whether the South African government will resurrect that case in the Constitutional Court, given that two lower courts have ruled against it. So I'm not quite sure the extent to which those judgments impose punitive measures. What is the penalty for South Africa breaking its domestic law? And that's something that I'm sure interested parties, stakeholders, and certainly opposition parties will seek clarity from the courts moving forward.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. That's Sherwin Bryce-Pease is reporting there from New York City. And yeah, I'm sure this is a story that will continue to unfold in the coming days and weeks and probably months and even years, given the timetable that's required to withdraw from the Rome Statute and the ICC.